In the July episode of the Sunshine Coast podcast, I realise how reliant I am on teleprompters.
We're back doing the July podcast, and I want to ask you about your Father's Day. How was Father's Day?
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah. We were up in the Shuswap. So we went up there, and my buddy Doug, that I'm with that on the Impact Initiative and do the coaching and stuff with, we're up visiting him. So his son was there. I had my boys with me. We did some whitewater rafting, which was quite cold. 7 degrees is cold. I didn't realise before I jumped in how cold that was.
That would be frigid, yeah.
Pretty cold. But yeah, it was cold. And we were up staying at his place on the lake on Gardiner Road up in the Shuswap there, and he's actually got that for sale. So I said I'd mention that on the podcast. If anyone's looking for a beautiful, brand new waterfront large home that's on the market, and you should check that one out.
That's a beautiful spot up there.
It is, really, really, really good. And we were lucky we got to watch some storms. We had some good weather. We kind of had all seasons, and it was just great being on the lake and having a bit of a break with the kids.
Something less fun than whitewater rafting in the Shuswaps, interest rates.
Yeah.
Last time I was on, we very confidently predicted that the interest rate would not go down, that we thought it would stay that way until at least fall. And then I think 2 or 3 days after that podcast came out, the rate did in fact go down.
Yeah. Went down. We thought it was going to stay. But don't worry about that, Paul, because in my recent article I wrote in the paper, I said it was a surprising move. So we were pretty...
I was a little surprised.
I was surprised by it.
I thought that they would be more focused on keeping pace with the Americans, but I guess that didn't happen. And what do you think did happen?
Well, what I've heard and what we've chatted about is that, and I guess the conspiracy theory is that the Bank of Canada has, dropped interest rates to kind of soften the landing for the large amount of Canadians that have to renew mortgages this year. So I think you gave me the stat, it was 75% of Canadian mortgages are being renewed in the next 18 months, was it?
Yeah, that's right. There was a story on CBC that was very good and very enlightening that there was obviously a big bump in home purchases during COVID, and we're kind of at the tail end of that cycle now, that all those people that bought 5 years ago are needing to renew mortgages. And of course, when they bought at very low prices, and now they're renewing at, pretty high interest rates.
Yeah. Lower prices and lower interest rates.
That's right, exactly, yes. And the concern is that Canadian homeowners might see mortgage payments go up by 40 to 50% when they renew mortgages. And I'm guessing then that the Bank of Canada sees this on the horizon and is now going to slowly ratchet down interest rates to try and offset some of that pain that homeowners might feel.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a surprise for us. And then the other thing that I noticed was that once interest rates were dropped, a lot of sellers and a lot of other agents and that kind of stuff was like, yes, it's going to happen finally. But we haven't really noticed that much of an uptick on the Sunshine Coast here with that quarter point interest rate reduction. So I think it's going to take more than that. And what we have noticed, though, is a lot more inventory coming on the market. So we're sitting at kind of double what the usual inventory is, on the coast, especially for this time of year. And it's quite slow. So I know my team and me, we're at about 50% of the normal production, so the normal amount of transactions that we do to this point in the year. Like a high year for us is probably 120 transactions. An average year is about 80. And then so far this year, I think we've done about 30. So, we're about 25% off what we normally are for the year if we track from, kind of what we've done at the, what are we now, 6 month production rate, right?
So you're seeing basically double the inventory than usual.
And half of the sales.
And half the sales.
Yeah.
So that's got to really put pressure on sellers to price aggressively, I would think, if they're serious about selling.
Yeah, you definitely want to get ahead of the market. So you don't want to be, one big thing is what everybody looks at. So they look at their tax assessment. We've done, podcasts and stuff on that before. So the tax assessment's based on the median cost or the average value of your house last July, right? Mm-hmm. And that'll be coming out again this year, and we're probably going to see assessments drop from, year over year just because the market's kind of dropped, especially on the Sunshine Coast. I mean, the big thing that happened here is when COVID happened or pre-COVID, the thing that kept our prices down and reasonable and why people would sell in North Van and come over here is because the ferry was a barrier to the market. It was a negative aspect of living here, as hard as BC Ferries tries and, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to summer and all the delays or, like them having trouble getting staff or whatever it is, or like me going to the shoe shop. Like we go to the shoe shop, it was a 4.5 hour drive. We left at the right time. It was perfect. But then there's 2 hours either end of that we have to add on for the ferries.
Right.
If you want to go to, and I've seen the podcast that you've done before with Live on the Sunshine Coast about, the negative things about living in Gibsons or on the Sunshine Coast in general. And a big part of that is, being able to go to a hockey game or being able to go to a movie. It's an overnight commitment most of the time, or you're spending hours sitting in a ferry terminal, which, as hard as BC Ferries works, it's not the most pleasant experience, especially the toilets. But other than it being pre-COVID being a barrier to market, what happened when COVID happened, in my experience, and this is a generalization, but what I found was people were like, oh, the ferry, that's great. That's a barrier to disease now. So it went from a huge negative to a huge positive. And we also saw all these buyers come over here that typically would never buy here because they had to go to work. So there was kind of like the perfect storm of stuff. We had that trial run of fibre that TELUS did. And so people looked at the coast and they went, it's a rural community. There's a barrier to disease, right? It's an older demographic, so people are going to be more careful. Why don't I just move me and the family over? Or while COVID's happening, we're going to buy a cottage, people with means from North or West Van or whatever. We're going to move over here. And that spiked all the prices. And interest rates were low and everybody thought this is amazing. There were no restrictions on short-term rentals, so it's a great investment because you've got your property that you can use when you want to. You could live there during COVID. And then for perpetuity, you're going to get wicked returns, 100% occupancy in summer and so on and so forth. But now the tide's kind of changed. You can't do Airbnb in the majority of the places you used to before. The ferry's back to being a barrier to market, especially in summer when you're waiting there. And our primary buyer group has gone back to being, 90% retirees. There's not a lot of young families moving here, but the values and the costs and that kind of thing will adjust. The Sunshine Coast is one of the few markets where there's like a 7-year cycle. We consistently see property values go down over that 7 years and then back up again. In most markets in Vancouver or different areas, you're not noticing properties lose value over time. They all ratchet themselves up, but we do see that here. So I think it's just the market here has come back to be, more realistic given the challenges geographically of getting here. And also a lot of the locals here, a lot of the people that move here, a lot of the primarily being retirees don't want to see change. They don't necessarily want to see growth. They don't want to see, new facilities and that kind of stuff put in for families because they're happy with it being a retiree community. They don't want, the increased tax burden of providing more facilities. And so compared to like the North Sunshine Coast, like Powell River, that kind of stuff, you see a lot more expenditure on infrastructure there. You see a lot more facilities and that kind of stuff. Whereas, the lower coast or Gibson specifically, it seems that, a lot of the decisions that are made are based on that primary demographic being the second oldest in BC and that retiree group. So I think that, really we're not seeing the new buyers come in. We are seeing the retirees coming that, aren't necessarily that affected by interest rates because a lot of them are cash buyers. But what we're seeing with a huge amount of inventory and a quarter of as many sales as normal, 4 times as much inventory, 25 or 50% the normal sales ratio, what you're going to see is a big adjustment in median house price over here. And I'd say up to 15% by the end of the year. So that's another prediction made on camera. We'll see if that lasts more than 2 days.
If prices are still under pressure to drop here on the Sunshine Coast, a seller that has their home for sale right now, what would be a sign that they've got their price too high?
Sitting for a long time and not getting showings or getting feedback. Because the normal process with a house, right, is we'll list the house, and in the first 2 to 3 weeks, that's where we see activity. That's where we get it on Realtor Tour. That's where we get feedback as far as it goes. And then if it's a motivated seller, so it's someone that needs to sell and trusts their real estate agent and wants to get as much as they can, they'll typically take that feedback, adjust their price accordingly, get some offers, sell, and then move on. if they're selling and buying, getting a little bit less for your house doesn't really matter, because as soon as you get that accepted offer, as soon as that's a firm deal, you become one of the few, like the what would you call it, like unicorns right now. A unicorn right now is a buyer that has money. Right, there aren't a lot of them around there. There's a lot of people that have houses that need to sell to be able to buy a house, and we have quite a few of them that we're working with, as does a lot of people. But if you're actually a buyer that has money, you have a lot more negotiating power. So in a soft market, even if you get less than you're asking for, you can buy for less than you need. What screws up some people is it's an investment property. It's a property that they've been holding. And they want to sell, but they want to make sure they don't leave any money on the table. And so, they end up potentially overpricing it and then chasing the market down. In a softening market, especially one with a huge amount of inventory, you're much, much better off getting ahead of it, listing, selling, and then getting out of that market and waiting to see kind of what happens and buy again. If you're making a lateral move, if you're selling and buying, give yourself a little bit longer close, sell your house, and then you can go out and negotiate. But overpricing your house in a softening market, 9 times out of 10 results in you have to do more of a price reduction to actually sell, or just not sell. And if it's an investment property, if you've got tenants in it, and you're shooting, swinging for the fences as far as price goes, and you're not going to get it, then you're upsetting those tenants. There's a very good chance those tenants are going to find somewhere else to live.
Right.
Then you're going to end up losing a couple of months, 3 months revenue, because the other thing that's happening now is the pressure's kind of coming off of tenants quite a bit. There's a lot more available. The people that aren't dumping their Airbnbs are putting them on long-term rental, and so there's more inventory as far as renting goes. The prices for renting is coming down, and especially with the restrictions on Airbnbs and that kind of stuff, those properties could be sold and then put on the market as a rental property if they're sold for the right price, and and the investor can get the capitalisation rate on the investment of the house on what they get as a return on rental. So I mean the landscape is changing quite a bit, and it's not easy to navigate. So I'd recommend anyone looking to buy on the Sunshine Coast or sell on the Sunshine Coast, it's really important to use a local real estate agent. And on a side note, we've just formed up the Sunshine Coast Real Estate Association. It's a association that we've got, which does donations to the coast and that kind of stuff, and puts on community events. But in that, there is a lot of consultation between the real estate agents and that kind of thing. So it's very, very beneficial to, in any area, whether it's the Sunshine Coast or anywhere else, use a real estate agent that's an expert on the area that you're buying or selling in. You may have a niece or a nephew that just got their license in Tawarson or Delta or Maple Ridge. They're not necessarily going to be your best asset shopping in a remote area if you're buying or selling an investment property over this way. So the Sunshine Coast Real Estate Association has just got some new branding and everything, and all the agents are fully engaged in that. And I think it's important to make sure you use an agent in an area where you're looking to buy or sell that is familiar with that area and active in that area.
Tony, what do you have for fantastic listings in the month of July?
Don't I have, Paul? Well, I've got some great ones that have just come up. A couple in Lower Gibsons, in the ones in the Bay Area. It's lovingly updated. Rancher, I think she's about 1,400 square feet. It's an absolute 10 out of 10. Home. It's a nice large lot. It's got some green space around it. It's private, yet right downtown in the middle across from the marina. It's an absolutely gorgeous property. I've also got one very similar to that in Roberts Creek. That one was an intergenerational purchase. It was the seller's forever home. The circumstances changed, and they do find themselves selling it. So they bought it at one of the peaks of the market. They've spent a ton of money on it. It's really good value at the price that it's listed at for a new buyer to come along. It's 2 separate living areas. One's a garden suite, which is 2 bed, 1 bath, spa-like bathroom in there. Mm-hmm. Really serene private area. The gardens are great, and yet still low maintenance. So if you've got a green thumb, you could garden all day. Otherwise, you could keep it kind of minimal. And then the main house also has a revenue suite on it that you could run as an Airbnb. Having a legal Airbnb suite or an authorised Airbnb suite now is very lucrative compared to what it used to be, just because there's so many less of them now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot fewer of them just with the regulations that have come in. I also have, speaking of Airbnb, I've got a duplex 527 Marine Drive. That's had a really nice cosmetic renovation on it. That one's, very active, licensed Airbnb. You can use half for yourself. You can rent it out, but they do really well at that. And they're just looking to move to a different province, so they're selling that. And then last of all, I've got a place out in Sechelt on Highmoor. So we just sold a really nice home in Highmoor. Sorry to see they were the owners of the 101 Office Supply in Sechelt. So they ended up moving back to Scotland. So their business, they shut it down. They sold their house, and then their very good neighbours, they were such good people that the neighbours are like, we're moving if they're not living here. So they're looking at downsize as well. So it's a beautiful home on Highmoor in Sechelt, and beautiful view, really great family home, and that one's really good value for money as well. A lot of the listings now that we've got are really good value for money because, the market's got a bit soft, and if they're a motivated seller, they're trying to get ahead. So, watch this space for some more listings, but those are the 4 that I think are the highlights for this month. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. While you're here, maybe you want to check out one of my listings or watch my video about why you should choose me to sell your home.